Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approvals webinar series. My name is Ashley and I'm part of the Certification and Approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I'll be presenting you the certification and approval regulations as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and devices approval in the Gulf states. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today we'll be going over the requirements for radio frequency and telecommunication approvals in the Gulf states. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio devices on the right track for authorization and distribution in the Gulf states. If you have any questions on the topics presented today or any other immediate questions regarding compliance testing and product certifications, you can reach us at info@vista-compliance.com. Without further ado, let's begin the presentation. Here are the Gulf state countries we will go over today. Despite the similar names of some of the regulatory bodies, the radio assessment schemes in these countries are all different and approvals have different requirements. In Bahrain, the regulatory body is the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority. In Kuwait, the regulatory body is Communication and Information Technology Regulatory Authority. In Oman, we have the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority. In Qatar, the regulatory body is the Communications Regulatory Authority, or CRA. In Saudi Arabia, the regulatory body is the Communications and Information Technology Commission. And lastly, in UAE, we have the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority. First up, we will go over Bahrain. Starting with a brief overview, what is the TRA? The TRA, or the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of the Kingdom of Bahrain, is the official independent body recognized by the government of Bahrain as the entity responsible for regulating the telecom sector. The TRA is focused on liberalizing and developing the telecom sector by promoting an effective and fair competition between established operators and new entrants while protecting the interests of consumers. The TRA addresses areas such as mobile service, ultra-fast broadband, international supply, digital security, and internet ecosystem. It also regulates radio frequency and the standardization of radio and telecom equipment. The TRA ensures compliance of products used in telecommunications with the relevant technical regulations. For telecommunications type approval in Bahrain, there are two different types of certificates of conformity you may have to obtain. For telecom devices, you will either go through the DWLF&M or TRA, depending on the device. DWLF&M is Directorate of Wireless Licensing, Frequency, and Monitoring. The DWLF&M is for wireless LAN-only devices, Bluetooth-only devices, short-range devices, satellite devices. TRA approval is for cellular-only devices or cellular plus any other type like Bluetooth, wireless, LAN, and information technology equipment. Now let's take a look at some of the regulated products. There are three main categories of devices regulated. The first is telecommunications equipment, and this excludes short-range devices and terminal devices. The next category is terminal devices, and the last category is passive equipment, such as external antenna. Some examples of telecommunications equipment that are regulated are switch, Ethernet switches, routers, servers. Terminal devices that are regulated by the TRA include GPS vehicle tracker, mobile cellular phone, network security appliance, access points, IP phones, point-of-sale terminals, laptops, tablets. Passive equipment that is regulated can be external antennas or omnidirectional antennas. Now let's take a look at the certification system and its requirements. There are national type approval requirements in place for RF, ITE, and telecom devices. All type approval applicants must be local, commercially registered companies, and a local certificate holder is required. In terms of what technical requirements apply, testing can be done locally or in-country. CE test reports are generally accepted to show compliance. Products should not be easily modifiable in hardware or software, shall not cause harm to the user, and shall be compliant with EMC emissions immunity requirements. The final approvals are valid for 3 years, and the lead time for certifications is 48 weeks depending on product complexity. The documentation needed for type approval consists of TRA application forms, a valid declaration of conformity, which is a certificate issued by the manufacturer with a list of standards covering safety, EMC, and radio frequency compliant with ITU, ISO, and ETSI rules. A product technical data sheet, a registration reference number which will be provided by the TRA, a copy of the manufacturer's Bahraini commercial registration certificate, and a local certificate holder is required. The application and any supporting documents can be in Arabic or English. In Bahrain, under TRA regulations, family model grouping for products is not permitted. Multiple branding is also not allowed, although modular is an option for host devices. This means that if an approved module is integrated in host device, then the host device does not require approval. Now looking at what changes are permitted for type-approved devices, wherever telecommunications equipment is modified in respect of model number, design, or function, it shall be reassessed for compliance. Where any such modifications to telecommunications equipment would necessitate a change to any documentations previously submitted to the authority, the approval holder shall provide the authority with updated documents. Now we will go over labeling and importation requirements. There are no mandatory requirement for labeling. However, the CE mark is recognized and private use equipment with the CE marking is allowed for importation. Suppliers shall retain and present to the TRA on demand the documents that prove the lawfulness of CE mark or any other standards for a period of 3 years from the latest import date. The TRA reserves the right to inspect the declaration of conformity and other documents supporting the CE mark that has been applied to any equipment to ascertain the CE mark has been lawfully affixed. Now let's review the TRA surveillance requirements. The TRA will perform market surveillance activities from time to time to ensure conformity of approved products. Manufacturers shall cooperate with the TRA by providing samples which are subject to market surveillance activities and any documents requested without charge. The TRA will return the sample upon ensuring fulfillment of the technical requirements. Where devices subject to market surveillance activities fails to fulfill the technical requirements, the manufacturer must take the necessary corrective actions for such equipment or refrain from selling it and ensure that it is not used in the market and dispose of it at their own expense. Failure to comply with such actions will be deemed a violation and penalties apply. So that covers Bahrain and the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority. Now we will go into CITRA, the Communications and Information Regulatory Authority of Kuwait. Starting with a brief overview, what is CITRA? The CITRA, or Communication and Information Technology Regulatory Authority, was created to license telecommunications and information technology equipment in Kuwait. It regulates radio frequency and the standardization of radio and telecom equipment. The CITRA ensures compliance of products used in telecommunications with the relevant technical regulations. protecting consumer affairs, regulating services, tariffs, and rates with the ICT tech sector, encouraging competition and investment in the ICT sector, and preventing unfair competition. The CITRA also supports the development of technology and efficient use of resources through standardization, management, and supervision of the telecommunications sector. There are many different categories of devices regulated by CITRA, ranging from radio devices, base stations, broadcast equipment, license-exempt equipment, and more. Some examples of common unlicensed telecommunications equipment that are regulated are Bluetooth, GPS, near-field communication, Wi-Fi, RFID, non-specified short-range device, Wi-Fi module, wireless audio applications, radio microphones, in-ear monitoring, and more. Now let's take a look at the certification system and its requirements. The technical requirements are: the device can be tested locally or in-country. Lead time for type approval is 6 to 8 weeks, depending on product complexity. Issued certificates are valid for 1 year. For the formal type approval, these are the documents required: an official letter addressed to CITRA requesting the type approval, products, technical specifications of the devices and frequency declarations, an authorization letter from the manufacturer, a declaration of conformity, product lab reports from an approved laboratory covering radio frequency, SAR, and EMC requirements. A local representative is required. In QA, under CITRA, family model grouping is not allowed, and multiple branding is not allowed. However, you can get modular approval permitted sufficient for host device. There are no mandatory requirements for labeling. However, CITRA recommends labeling in line with the EU labeling. So that covers Kuwait and the Communication and Information Technology Regulatory Authority. Now we will go into TRA, the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Oman. Starting with a brief overview, what is the TRA? The TRA, or Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, was created to license telecommunications and information technology equipment in Oman. The TRA ensures compliance of products used in telecommunications with the relevant technical regulations, ensures the provision of telecommunications services all over the Sultanate with reasonable prices, developing economic competence and the performance of licensees engaged in the commercial activities related to the sector. The TRA also supports the development of technology and efficient use of resources through standardization, management, and supervision of the telecommunications sector. There are 3 main categories of devices regulated. The first is radio equipment, and this includes short-range devices. The next category is terminal devices, and the last category is GSM equipment such as mobile devices. Some examples of radio equipment that are regulated are wireless access systems, short-range devices, and medical devices. Terminal devices that are regulated by the TRA include telephone sets and fax machines. GSM equipment that is regulated can be mobile devices and other cellular devices. Now let's take a look at the requirements from the TRA. In terms of testing, products can be tested locally or in country. It is generally a paperwork-only process. The lead time depends on product complexity and is usually around 3 to 6 weeks. You will need the product's full technical data and specification documents. A logo certificate holder is required. Test reports covering RF, EMC, and safety are required from a test lab recognized by the TRA or approved by a member of the ILAC. You will need a copy of the Manufacturer Declaration of Conformity and the TRA needs documents from the User's Guide and Sales Brochure with color photographs of the equipment. And again, local representation required for approval in Oman. The final issue type approval certificates are valid permanently, although we recommend renewal every 5 years. Now we will go over the Oman TRA labeling requirements. Dealers registered with TRA are responsible to ensure labeling of all the imported and distributed telecom equipment. The label must be affixed to the product, plus the product packaging, or on the user manual. If there are size restrictions, the label must instead be applied to packaging. Labeling is voluntary for automotive applications that are already fitted on automobiles, modules, and interface cards already fitted in housing before importation to Oman, and all access and core network equipment imported for installation in the public licensed telecom networks. Generally, the label has to be with a white background and black writing. The label size is required to be of 10 millimeters in height and 18 millimeters in width as its minimum dimensions. The title Oman TRA has to be a minimum height of 2 millimeters. The type approval number and dealer number has to be a minimum of 1.5 millimeter. The labeling format of the type approval number is XNNNYY, where X refers to equipment class, T is for terminal, G for mobile handset, R for radio, NNN refers to type approval number, YY refers to the issue year of approval. Below that number is the dealer number formatted as DYYNNNN, where D refers to the dealer, YY refers to the year of registration, NNN refers to a dealer-specific number provided by the TRA. So that covers Oman and the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority. Now we will move on to the Communications Regulatory Authority of Qatar. Starting with a brief overview, what is the CRA? The CRA, or Communications Regulatory Authority, was created to license telecommunications and information technology equipment in Qatar. The Communications Regulatory Authority, CRA, is the communications regulator in the state of Qatar. The CRA regulates the telecommunications and information technology sector, postal sector, and access to digital media. The CRA encourages and supports an open and competitive information and communications technology. CRA balances the rights of consumers with the needs of service providers. The CRA provides advanced, innovative, and reliable communications services. There are a number of items that are exempted from the type approval process. Each type of equipment subject to this treatment is listed in the table below, along with specified technologies and the type of use. The following types of equipment are exempt from product approval: receiver-only transmitter RF devices such as mobile handsets, receiver-only transmitter RF device embedded in personal computers, RF device for amateur use, cable and wiring RF device, broadcast receivers RF device, vehicle component RF device, infrared remote control device equipment, RF device for military use, for security agencies. Now let's take a look at the requirements from CRA. An application for type approval must be accompanied by the following supporting documentation and must include all supporting documents: a Declaration of Conformity, DOC, issued by the manufacturer, technical operational documentation, which contains all suitable test reports and other supporting documents demonstrating compliance to the RF device with the required standards, circuit diagrams, PCB layouts, parts list, and other design and construction information for those parts of the RTTE which have a direct impact on compliance with the technical requirements. Photographs or illustrations showing external features and internal layout. They should be in sufficient detail to permit reliable visual identification. Label placed on the RF device. The lead time for certification takes 2 to 4 weeks, and approval certificates are valid permanently. You can see the Qatar label on this slide while we go over labeling requirements. The characters shall appear in black print against a white background. No characters shall be less than 2 mm in height. The letter Q of ICT Qatar shall be at least 3 mm in height. Where N appears, it should be substituted by the registration number provided by ICT Qatar to the equipment. Where XXXXXXXX appears, shall be substituted the dealer registration number allocated by ICT Qatar to the authorized importer who made the application concerned. The label may be applied to the packaging. When the label is applied to the packaging equipment, the minimum dimensions specified above shall be doubled. Any other marking may be affixed to the product provided that the label is visible. Now let's review the CRA surveillance requirements. It is a violation of the telecommunications law to import, supply, or use products which are not type approved or which does not meet applicable technical requirements and standards in Qatar. CRA will perform market surveillance activities from time to time to ensure that only type approved products are sold in Qatar. An authorized officer shall at any reasonable time enter any premises where the product is kept. CRA may take all appropriate measures to withdraw the product in question from the market or from service, prohibit its placing on the Qatari market, or putting into service or restrict its free movement or other enforcement measures that may be deemed as appropriate by CRA. The CRA reserves the right to withdraw the importer authorization at any time where it deems that the relevant regulations and technical requirements have not been observed. CRA may publish on its website upon its sole discretion information deriving from its monitoring and surveillance activities. So that covers Qatar and the CRA. Now we will go into Communications and Information Technology Commission, CITC, of Saudi Arabia. Starting with a brief overview, what is the CITC? The CITC, or Communications and Information Technology Commission, was created to license telecommunications and information technology equipment in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It regulates radio frequency and the standardization of radio and telecom equipment. The CITC ensures compliance of products used in telecommunications with the relevant technical regulations. The CITC also supports the development of technology and efficient use of resources through standardization, management, and supervision of the telecommunications sector. Most of the standards are based on international standards such as ETSI, and many of the regulations follow HS codes. Many telecommunication and wireless products are subject to Saudi Arabian CITC approval, and it is mandatory for every wireless or telecom device that's produced, assembled, used, or traded with the Saudi Arabian territory to comply with the technical requirements based on the applicable regulation. A certificate of type approval and, for some products, a safety and shipping certificate are required for radio equipment and other regulated devices to be sold in or imported into Saudi Arabia. Here is a list of just a few of the regulated products. The CITC will regulate a lot of these items, like products for navigation and smartphones. The SASO is slowly starting to gain regulation rights to some of these types of products. The products that are regulated will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis according to the data sheet and HS codes. There are some special requirements for mobile phones regulated by CITC. They must contain the CITC E-label for importation. They have to comply with technical requirements to enable Cell Broadcast Services (CBS) alerts, and support 4G as a requirement for equipment approval and customs clearance. Okay, we are just taking a look at some of the products regulated by the CITC. Now we will look at the technical requirements used to show compliance in Saudi Arabia. The measurement procedures can be classified as either CITC requirements covering EMC and RF or SASO requirements covering safety. Many of the technical requirements follow European international standards. When applying for type approval, we should be aware of what technical requirements are applicable and appropriate for the device seeking certification. The CITC is entitled to request a sample of the equipment for performing the necessary examinations and testing for ensuring the conformity to its requirements. The CITC itself does not perform the tests for products. Test reports should be obtained by a lab that is a member of the ILAC Mutual Recognition Arrangement or examination laboratories licensed in the Kingdom in accordance with the Private Laboratories Law. The test reports will need to be submitted to obtain the Certificate of Conformity. Here are the documents you need to submit to obtain certification. All the test reports, the technical specification of product, the user manual, product internal and external photos, the circuit diagram schematic, declaration of conformity. You also need the applicable HS codes for submission to obtain SASO Certificate of Conformity. Certification will take about 1 to 2 weeks depending on which certification you are applying for. The certification process for CITC will take about 1 to 2 weeks, and SASO safety certification will take about 1 week. The validity period for the CITC certificate is 2 years, while the SASO certificate is valid for 1 year. There is a full renewal process that can start the same day as the certificate expiration date. You will have to go through the certification process again to get a new certificate for your product. I know I said this earlier in the presentation, but it is important to note that the applicant must reside in Saudi Arabia and be either the manufacturer, local representative, or importer. If you are trying to apply for certification and do not reside in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, you must have one of the 3 types of applicants above. Family models are not allowed, so each model will need its own certificate. Modular approvals, however, are allowed. For modular approvals, only the module is covered. Any end-user device will still require approval if it is on the technical regulations list or regulated by the CITC. The only type of labeling required by the CITC is for small gadgets. It is mandatory for mobile phones, tablets, and other smart devices to obtain an E-label before importation. Any equipment falling under the scope of CITC technical specification RI 056, namely UMTS and LTE handsets and related terminal equipment, are required to at least support 4G and contain CITC E-label to receive approval from the CITC and enter into the country. The label is a mark that the equipment complies with the technical regulations for smart gadgets in Saudi Arabia. After successful approval of one of the products by the CITC, the manufacturer is obligated to mark the applicable products with the E-label and can then put it on the market. The E-label must be shown as it is here, with the words Kingdom of Saudi Arabia above the box and the CITC with the certificate number starting with TA below it inside the box. All equipment being imported into Saudi Arabia must first be certified. The certification is intended to guarantee the interoperability and inner working among products, avoid interference between equipment, protect consumers from being disadvantaged of telecommunication equipment use, and to push technology innovation in national industry. Products that fall under the technical regulations will need a shipment certificate, so you need to go through the SABRE process to be able to import the product into the kingdom. If these products do not have required certificate, they will not be allowed into the country, and it will cost both parties valuable time. The conditions for importation are that the applicant must be a Saudi company or have a valid commercial registration. The applicant must also be located in Saudi Arabia and must be able to show that the product is in compliance with the technical regulations. Any piece of equipment that is still made, assembled, or imported to be traded in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia after the 2-year certificate has expired will have to be renewed and recertified. When products are being imported, they go through a procedure to make sure the certificates that accompany the product actually match the product, and that any labels, user manuals, and other specific required items are present. It is essentially the final check of the product to make sure it's ready to be on the market. Surveillance is actually handled on a case-by-case basis. The CITC reserves the right to obtain any samples to ensure the ongoing conformity with applicable technical regulations. A reason surveillance might happen is if there are multiple customer complaints about the product, if something is not working properly, or is behaving as if it is not in compliance with regulations. The CITC will obtain a sample to ensure conformity. This does not happen that often because some customer complaints could just be an error, but when there are multiple complaints about the same thing, it's grounds for investigation. What are the rules for project changes or modifications to certified equipment? One of the conditions for equipment approval is stated as follows. No alteration has been made to the equipment specifications or characteristics. This means in order to be in compliance with the equipment approval, no alterations have been made to the product's technical specifications. The manufacturer is prohibited to make any alteration of the technical parameters of the product during its whole life cycle. Alterations could be a violation of the Telecommunications Act depending on how severe the alteration is. If the product is in violation of the Telecommunications Act, there will be a cancellation of the CITC's approval and license. The CITC has the right to take disciplinary action for any violations or major changes to a product. The importer must inform the CITC about any alterations they want to make to the approved equipment before it gets imported into the country. The CITC will let the importer know if the alterations are minimal enough where they can continue with the certificate they already have for the product, or if the changes are too drastic and they must go through the process again to get a new certificate for the altered product. So that covers the Communications and Information Technology Commission of Saudi Arabia. Now we will go into the Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of United Arab Emirates. Starting with a brief overview, what is the TRA? The TRA, or Telecommunications Regulatory Authority, was created to license telecommunications and information technology equipment in the United Arab Emirates. The Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of the United Arab Emirates was established according to the UAE Federal Law of Telecom Law on regulating the telecommunications sector in the UAE. Since its establishment, the TRA has exceeded expectations by achieving its projected goals in record time. The role of TRA focuses on two fields: regulating the telecommunications sector and enabling government entities in the field of smart transformation. The objectives of the TRA include ensuring adequate provision of telecommunications services throughout the UAE, developing services in terms of quality and variety, ensuring quality of services by adherence to terms of licenses and by licensees, and the establishment of training institutions related to the sector, resolving disputes between the licensed operators, establishing and implementing a regulatory and policy framework, promoting new technologies, developing the country's human capital, encouraging research and development to ensure that the UAE has a leading regional position. Now let's take a look at the requirements from TRA. An application for type approval under the standard type approval process must be accompanied by the following supporting documentation. Must include all supporting documents. UAE reserves the rights to require up to 2 sample units along with the appropriate test accessories. The approval process takes up to 15 working days. Testing can be tested locally or in-country. Lead time is dependent on complexity. The process is handled through ESMA portal. Samples required for WWAN products but may be requested for all devices. Arabic language user manual. Approval holder must be registered with ESMA. Scope regulated equipment within 50 to 1,000 VAC and 75 to 1,500 VGC. Local representative is required. Lead time is product dependent. Approvals are valid for 3 years. In UAE, under TRA regulations, family model grouping for products is permitted. Multiple branding is not allowed, although modular is an option for host devices. This means that if an approved module is integrated in host device, then the host device does not require approval. You can see the UAE label on the slide while we go over labeling requirements. Products shall contain a product statement card as specified above. The tag can be marked using black and white colors. The QR code shall contain the basic information shown in the middle box. That covers all of the Gulf states. This concludes our webinar of the Gulf States Market Access Certifications and Approvals for Electrical Equipment and Wireless Products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for approval and certifications as well as what requirements are applicable to your products. Vista Compliance Lab specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices. We are a 17025 accredited EMC RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan, and we provide certification and approvals for all product types and countries all over the world. If you would like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today, or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista-compliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.